Section 6 of Wanderings in New South Wales, Batavia, Pedir Coast, Singapore and China, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Jennifer Beckett-Wood. Wanderings in New South Wales, Batavia, Pedir Coast, Singapore and China, Volume 1, by George Bennett. Chapter 6. On the 24th of September, after an agreeable sojourn with Mr. E. Cox, and again accompanied by Mr. O'Brien, we resumed our journey, retracing our road to Wallerawang and crossing the country to Goulburn Plains. We arrived at Wallerawang on the morning of the 28th, and, after a short stay, proceeded on our journey, taking a bush road across the country, past Honeysuckle Swamp, so called from abounding in that species of Banksia, before mentioned as Rose marinifolia, about which the old grass was on fire. The custom of setting the dry grass on fire is very prevalent throughout the colony, as the young grass shooting up soon after affords fine feeding for cattle, etc. After riding about 7 miles, we arrived at a stockade, inhabited by a road gang employed upon the new Bathurst Road, having a very distant view of the descent at Mount Victoria, from which the road we were upon was a continuation, and a splendid view of mountain ranges and forest scenery was now before us. We only proceeded a few miles upon this excellent road, when we turned off into a dull bush path through a portion of country which, from its want of animation, became tiresome to man and beast. There was nothing to excite the attention of either, and the horses always appeared to participate, with ourselves, in the want of a lively character in the country. Emerging from this wild bushy track, we came upon the old Bathurst Road, and then the country assumed a better appearance, being thinly timbered, and herds of cattle gave some animation to the scene, increasing the beauty of the landscape. As we proceeded, the Fish River was occasionally seen winding its course among acacias, swamp oaks, and other trees which grew upon its banks, and the sight of a river in this badly watered country was always a pleasing relief. We crossed this river, and deviating from the main road, arrived at Sidmouth Valley, the neat farm and residence of Mr. Lowe, by whom we were kindly received, and remained for the night, after a journey this day of 22 miles. A distant view of the Bathurst Plains was obtained from this farm. We left Sidmouth Valley early on the following morning through a good bush road, and arrived at a portion of thinly timbered country having a character of park scenery, abounding in fine herbage. This brought us almost immediately upon a cattle station, the property of Captain P. P. King, R.N. There was no one in the hut, so, after feeding our horses, we again proceeded, and, after a 4-mile ride, arrived at a cattle station belonging to Mr. Scarville, called Brisbane Valley, although from its quality and locality, swamp would have been a more correct nomenclature. From this station our road led by a bush path between wooded hills and through miserable swamps famed for the loss of an immense number of sheep, until we arrived at a place called Squashfield, and never was a more appropriate name bestowed upon a locality, for although the vegetation, springing up from the swamps, gave a fresh, fertile, and even beautiful appearance to the place, yet the moist, chilly, and raw atmosphere could excite no other ideas than those connected with rheumatisms, catarrhs, and analogous diseases, to which cold and damp will subject the human frame. From the lateness of the hour we took up our night's lodgings in the hut at this station, where everything was done to make us as comfortable as possible. Squashfield was, for the present, rented by Mr. Imlay as a cattle station. This place is an extensive range of swampy flats of fertile appearance, which was the cause of it being first selected as a sheep station, and its bright features, when the young grass is springing up, charmed many into severe losses, for, not taking into calculation the quality of the soil or the adaptation of the place for a sheep run, numerous flocks were placed upon it, and the result was, before any long period had elapsed, the loss of the whole from rot. And yet, notwithstanding these facts, more sheep were subsequently placed on the same spot, and, as might have been expected, with similar results, from the damp and swampy nature of the situation. Even now the stock keepers stated that cattle could not remain about the place, but wander away to more congenial pasturage in other parts of the country. We rose at daylight to continue our journey. A hoar frost whitened the ground, and the atmosphere was exceedingly cold and damp. Even our horses were impatient to leave this uncongenial spot, having been left by themselves during the night. For every animal, except those in confinement, which had been collected together with much trouble the previous day, were all reported absent without leave on the following morning. After a short journey through a similar swampy country, we arrived at a more elevated and agreeable spot, when we stopped to take refreshments, made a bush fire, prepared tea, turning out our horses to graze in a fine pasturage. Many of the eucalypti trees were throwing off their dark brown and rough outer bark, appearing in a new one of a greyish colour. The appearance of the trees, partially denuded, with strips of brown, crisped bark hanging about their trunks and branches ready to fall, being a general peculiarity of the trees of the country, excites the attention of the stranger. Our road led through a broken but picturesque country, thinly timbered, and appeared good pasture land. We crossed a small river called the Bingham, the country improving very much as we proceeded, abounding in beautiful park scenery, and the distant hills rising one above the other, both thinly and in some situations densely wooded, was an agreeable change to the uninteresting sameness of the country through which we had for the most part journeyed. The species of eucalyptus, termed box tree by the colonists, was most abundant. It has a rough scaly bark, differing in that particular from most of the other species or varieties of the same genus. On the elevated spots, the Exocarpus cupressiforme, or native cherry tree, was seen, but the situation appeared uncongenial to its growth, for, instead of the graceful and elegantly pending branches, with delicate dark green foliage, such as this tree presents when growing in sheltered situations, it now had a stunted brown and wretched appearance. About noon we arrived at Mr. Murphy's station at Bingham, being 17 miles from Squashfield. The approach to marshy land is readily indicated by the melody of the frog tribe, among which the peculiar sound uttered by that species known by the name of the bell frog is very often heard, and indeed the name is not inapplicable to the creature, the sound it produces being very similar to a sheep bell. Detached clumps of wiregrass, intermingled with the brown-coloured sedge-grass, and at some places reeds, Arundo phragmites, Linnaeus, also point out those watery patches which are often met by the traveller while journeying through this country. Birds were occasionally numerous, particularly when near a river, but magpies and crows were never found wanting in any part of the country, abounding everywhere, the former the same impudent peculating race as at home. As for the parrot tribe, enough may be seen in a day's ride to supply all the maiden ladies in Europe with pollies sufficient to talk or scream them to death in an inconceivably short period of time, and the peculiar noise of the laughing or feathered jackass, Dicelo gigantea, which increases from a low to a loud, thrilling, gurgling laugh, was often heard. We continued our journey over a very beautiful and romantic country, with distant, thinly wooded mountains trending towards the Abercrombie River, which was not far off, reminding me of some of the splendid scenery of Devon. After travelling about 4 miles, descending a steep hill, we arrived on the banks of the river, which at this part of its course was a rapid but not broad stream. Swamp oaks, Casuarina paludosa, grew abundantly on the banks, their dark foliage giving a gloomy character to the scene. After crossing the river, which, not having been lately swollen by rains, was effected without much difficulty, we had to ascend a very steep hill, which brought us to a gradually ascending road over hills, having a remarkably beautiful, verdant, and romantic appearance. The thinly wooded hills were thickly clothed with a bright carpeting of verdure, imparting a cheerful feature to the country, which was further increased by a number of flowers scattered about of various tints, among which were the naphtalium, with yellow, white, and pink blossoms, emu flowers, Richia glauca, and a great number of the Orchidae family, their blue, pink, and yellow flowers rising a short distance above the surface of the ground. All afforded a pleasing variety to the many natural beauties of this place. As we ascended this road, the sloping declivities of the hills in the vicinity, clothed with rich pasturage, sufficiently wooded to give variety, with an occasional glimpse of the Abercrombie winding its course between the lofty, smiling hills, increased, as we proceeded, the beauty of the prospect. Even the climate was changed. Instead of the damp, frosty, wintry climate we had left only in the morning, we were suddenly transported, a word obsolete in the colony, to another region, the weather fine, clear and serene sky, the sun shining brilliantly upon the smiling scene. Birds carolling seemed to sympathize in our feelings. Butterflies and other brilliant insects sported over the gay flowers that strewed our path, and the whole formed a scene doubly felt by comparison with the uninteresting country we had left. After we had attained the summit of this hilly ascent, the road led through a more swampy and thickly wooded country, but that character did not continue far, for we again approached an open forest country, and a farm at Bolham appeared situated on an opposite hill to that over which the road we were then traversing passed. On descending, we crossed a rivulet or creek, for the terms are synonymous in this country, called Bolham Creek, and at 5 p.m. arrived at the neat farm of Mr. James Hassell. We now reached the Argyll country, and the contrast between this and the portion of the Bathurst district through which we had passed was much in favour of the former. The distance of our journey this day was 28 miles, and our horses, not lately having had good feeding from the poorness of the pasturage, we here gave them a day's rest, and although we had to regret the absence of Mr. Hassell, we yet received every attention from the persons left in charge. We resumed our journey early on the morning of the 30th, but the day turned out very wet. About Bolham Creek, flocks of wild ducks were abundant. These birds were not so wild about creeks as on large rivers. The barn doors about the farms, in imitation of a similar custom in the old country, were decorated by the brushes and tails of that shepherd's pest, the dingo, or native Australian dog, and other vermin belonging to the colony. As we rode through the bush, the moist atmosphere occasioned a strong aroma to be diffused from the leaves of the gum trees, as well as from odoriferous flowers. The country was of a picturesque character, and after a distance of 12 miles, we reached a station belonging to Mr. Ellis, called Turrill, where we remained an hour to refresh our horses. I remarked the red gum in abundance on most trees of the eucalyptus genus. The red, spotted and white gum, iron and stringy bark, manna, box, and others produced it profusely. It exudes both spontaneously and in larger quantities when incisions have been made on the trunk, more particularly after rain. It is seen in masses upon the trunk, but its particles have so little tenacity that when in a concrete form any attempt to detach them in one entire lump fails, and it crumbles immediately into innumerable minute fragments. This gum resin has a strong astringent quality and is one of the varieties of the kino of commerce, the other variety of kino being brought from Africa and is produced by a tree of the Pterocarpus genus. When first it issues from the tree, it is of the consistence of very thick syrup, and immediately after rain may be seen flowing from an incision or cleft in the tree very abundantly, being then of a very beautiful light red colour, becoming of a dark shining red and hardening by exposure to the air. The Angophora lanceolata, or apple tree of the colonists, a genus allied to that of eucalyptus, also yields a dark red astringent gum from its trunk and branches. After leaving Turil, we proceeded through a flat, swampy and uninteresting country, rendered still more tiresome by the drizzling rain. Having passed Stony Creek and descended Church Hill, we were glad to obtain shelter at the farm of Mingabla, the property of Charles Cowper, Esquire, after a journey of 28 miles. The soil about this part of the country was of a fertile character, but stony, abounding in the whinstone. Much of the dull time during our confinement to the house, from the heavy and continued rain, was passed away by the amusing relations of the overseer, who informed us he had, from a very tender age, a propensity to keep living animals. Since his arrival in this country, he had succeeded in domesticating a large number of parrots, who went in and out of the house without making any attempt to escape from his protecting care. But one fatal day this pleasing domestic scene was changed to one of a tragical nature, for, at an unlucky hour, a stranger arrived, accompanied by a big dog of a black colour. The result proved that the dog had only one propensity, and that, to speak phrenologically, was destructiveness. So, availing himself of the absence of those of human creation, and excited by the aforesaid organ and the dullness of the times, he began to attack and speedily demolish the frames of the pollies, scattered their limbs and feathers about, and did not leave one survivor to relate the tale. The horrid sight that met the affectionate eyes of the owner on his return was his favourites, some with bowels protruding from their natural cavity, others minus heads and limbs, and all so damaged as to have life extinguished. The big black dog even then was caught busily occupied in shaking about what remained of those unfortunate feathered bipeds. After this melancholy occurrence, he became disheartened from having any more favourites, and gave it to us as the cause why he had no curious animals at this time to show us. But in my opinion, the relation was much more amusing than the animals would have been, so their absence, at least to us, was not a source of regret. Although the rain still continued, we proceeded on our journey the following morning, being desirous of reaching Goulburn Plains, which was now only 20 miles distant. We passed through a swampy, thinly wooded country, and by noon arrived at Tarlow, on the banks of the Cockbundoon River. Proceeding several miles further, from the summit of a hill near the road, we were gratified by a splendid distant view of a portion of Goulburn Plains, and the open forest land in its vicinity. We passed through the township, which at present contains only a few bark and wooden habitations. This situation for the township not being originally well chosen, it is the intention of government to remove it to a more suitable part of the plains. We arrived in the evening at the prettily situated dwelling house and fine estate of J. Bradley, Esquire, called Lansdowne Park, from which there is a fine prospect of a very picturesque portion of the plains. This part of the country, called Goulburn Plains and Mulwaree by the aborigines, is a series of beautiful plains, clear of timber, except where a few scattered clumps of Banksia rosmarinifolia, or honeysuckle, are seen, readily distinguished by its dark appearance, contrasted by the lively carpeting of verdure beneath and around them. Hills of moderate elevation, with sloping declivities, and wooded on their summits divide the plains and give a pleasing variety to the prospect, while distant mountains, having a blue tinge, terminate the view to the horizon. Occasional patches of land under cultivation with grain, innumerable herds of cattle grazing, and flocks of sheep, attended by their shepherds, gave animation to the verdant plains, not yet browned by the parching summer heats. The following morning we crossed the plains, through a still beautiful country, passing the farms of Messrs. Howie, Rossi, and Moore, near which the Wallandilly River flows in a fine stream. After a ride of 9 miles, the weather being unfavourable, we sought shelter and received a kind reception at Cardross, the farm of Mr. Kinghorn. On the road, several of that elegant species of the eucalyptus, the E. mannifera or manna tree, was seen, having just produced flower buds, but no manna was yet secreted from the trees. Since leaving the Blue Mountain Range, not a single shrub of the waratah or tulip tree, Telopea speciosissima, has been met with, and I heard from several persons that the attempt as yet made to rear it in the gardens in this part of the colony had failed. From the splendid beauty of its flowers, the introduction would be desirable, as conducing much to the ornamental appearance of the flower garden. End of section 6.